Welcome to the Steven Semino Says Boom Show issue number 84.
Boom.
Hey everyone, welcome to Pop XP. And before the show starts, make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload awesome new content. And don't forget, if you can, make sure to share our stream on all your social media outlets. We appreciate it, and thanks for helping us grow the Pop XP channel.
All right, welcome everybody to the Steven Semino Says Boom Show issue 48. And look who's back now. We got him here after 2 episodes.
I thought it was 84.
And you missed Ralph Macchio's favorite interview of all time. He can't wait to come back. I mean, come on. And then Polito, Roy Thomas. It was unbelievable. But we missed you, Steve. We're happy you're back. Before we get into it, now tell us what's going on, brother.
All right, everyone. As you know the house rules, please look below, click that subscribe button, and smash that bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content. And gentlemen, I've got my lantern set. I'm ready to dive into these dark, deep secrets of our topic tonight.
Okay, before we get into our guests and all that stuff, Steve went back. He went abroad, back home. Steve, I saw all like the videos. You know, I had a good time with over. Tell us what happened when you went back home. The big boy went back. The celebrity of comics went back home. Tell me.
Big Ben went back home.
Everything went as planned, which is a miracle. And funny thing is that I was in a little tiny pub in my town, and a guy walked by and he stopped. He looked at me for a second and he just carried on looking. And I looked over and he goes, "Porn stars, right?" And I was like, yes. So it's really funny that even in my old small town, which hadn't changed much, some things had changed, but generally speaking, still nice and quiet. But yeah, it was basically friends and family only, no stupid visiting and looking at museums or bridges. It was just go home, relax, and have a good time. But more importantly, go up and meet my mum again because she's getting old. She's 86. The trip went magnificently. Yeah, just a wonderful time.
Well, I saw that you went to a few comic shops too. You took some videos of that. How was that? How was seeing those comic shops? And how do they compare to the great Torpedo Comics?
Well, the one little comic shop was so small. It was so tiny. And, I had to catch myself because like in the video, I called it a quaint little store. And I thought, oh, did I just like bum rush this store? But there were two great guys. Well, one girl, the girl assistant and the owner. And then we went, if you saw, there was that video of the toy store.
Yes.
Which was massive, which has more stuff than any store that I've ever seen in America. And I don't know where this store came from. It's in a really rural area, about 40 minutes away from my old house in England. I never had any idea. There was so much. If that store was in LA, oh my word. Think about Amoeba, the record place, but when it comes to toys.
Oh, wow.
Just went on and on and on. I just couldn't believe it. And again, if I'd been a toy person, I would have probably, made out like a bandit. But but it was very impressive.
Well, it was good to see that, Steve. Good to see you. And we're glad you're back home with us here and all that stuff. So anyways, without further ado, we're going to get into the weeds with this. We talked about this before. I know, Steve, you ain't a big RPG guy and all that stuff, but we sometimes take segues into the world of comics and stuff. We always get into wrestling. It's all part of pop culture. We get into role-playing, Dungeons and Dragons, and everything. And I've been wanting this guy on for a long time. And in celebration, I got my Lord Soth Unimpressed shirt. And I brought I have about 50 of these, my Lord Soft Bar, new Funko Pop, which was exclusive at San Diego Comic-Con and all that stuff. And just so you know, I knew somebody that worked at Funko that I actually got the first prototype made of this from China and I have it in a box all sealed up. I have actually the prototype of this because Steve, I'll do anything for my Lord Soft. But anyways, we got a role-playing game. See, the reason why I wanted this guy is he's a maverick, and we like our mavericks. Niall's not so much of a maverick, but Steve and me, we're a little wild. Hey, he's married, and we got to. But this guy,
settled. He's settled and calm.
I'm chained at the ankles.
Yeah, but this guy, he wrote something. He wrote a book that is. I would explain it, even if anybody here doesn't know role-playing games who's watching right now. Niall, put it up. If anybody knows this great book right here, it was Sean Howe's Marvel Comics, The Untold Story. Now, this was incredible. I'm in that book too as well. But, I mean, it showed what went on behind the scenes in these shark-infested waters and all that stuff of Marvel and all that stuff. And it was unbelievable. Roy, that obviously is, I think that was the first guy Sean interviewed, if I know. But Marvel never said anything about it, but for some reason, Marvel doesn't want to work with Sean Howe anymore. So I don't know how happy they were about this. But Wizards of the Coast, who owns Dungeons and Dragons right now, I don't know if they're going to be calling this guy up anyways, because I always see him online in his threads. It's like Niall said, he's autistically truthful. This guy will throw things out there, and he'll talk about what's going on in the RPG industry, regardless whether anybody likes it or not. And that's what I love. And this book is a representation of it. So without further ado, let's now, you think we should show the book first to anybody out there?
Yeah, let's bring it up.
Yeah, we'll show this first. This book right here, Slaying the Dragon, A Secret History of Dungeons and Dragons by the great Ben Riggs. Why this is so good is because he doesn't pull any punches, and he talks about what went on. He didn't care if the bullets were going to come. He was ready to die when he did it. So let's bring him out. Let's bring out Mr. Ben Riggs.
Yeah.
That was the greatest intro I've had in my life.
Yeah. So Ben, thank you for being here. And I'm right about your little threads when you put them up. When you put those threads up there, you pull no punches. And right when I saw that, I respected you. But before we get into that, Ben, let's go back. We talk about people, about their history of comics and all that stuff. Tell me your history into role-playing games, because obviously you've got a passion for that stuff.
Wow.
Go ahead.
I would say that role-playing games have been the map of my life in many ways. I discovered them when I was 12 years old. My first was the Marvel Superheroes role-playing game, actually. Absolutely fantastic game.
Oh.
From there, I got into just a little bit of D&D. D&D was never my number one game, which I think is not a coincidence. I think it's one of the reasons that I've ended up writing about D&D, because I'm familiar with it. I like it, but it's never been my number one thing, which maybe is why I'm okay with, I don't know, saying that the co-creator was sexist. And other people are kind of like, but I got super into role-playing games. I never really fell out of them. I moved abroad in 2002. I went to Egypt for 2 years. Japan for 2 years, China for a year, came back, got into teaching, but I was playing role-playing games the whole time. Teaching, getting married, I had time to devote to writing. That led to writing for Geek and Sundry. That led to being assigned an article that was supposed to be, hey, did you know that Wizards of the Coast didn't always make D&D? And when I went to research that article, I found out such shocking things that I felt like I had to keep writing. My editor at Geek and Sundry was like, we can't publish the most shocking things that you found. And I'm like, well, okay, that just tells me I should really keep writing. And 3 articles turned into 10,000 words, turned into 100,000 words, and it got published. And then I'm working on a sequel right now. For those of you who don't know, the last 10 years have been the most successful in D&D history.
Yeah.
But in the last 2 years, Hasbro, which owns Wizards, which owns D&D, has decided that now is the time to try and make D&D into a billion-dollar brand. And they seem to be doing that by firing all of the people who made it as successful as it already was, and putting people in charge that seem to not understand the product and be thinking about it in terms of monetization before how do we make a great game. And of course, it's the comic book industry, I'm sure, is familiar with that dynamic. And it's a harmful one. And as they fire people, I seem like I'm doing exit interviews for them, because every time they let people go, I talk to them, and I think I'm getting the straight skinny, but we'll see. I'm still writing. It'll take 2 or 3 more years, I think, to write this, because I try to talk to everyone.
Yeah, I noticed that I remember you speaking about that. A lot of those former employees, they came to you. Now, how did you get that? Like, how did that come about? Like, how did they come to you?
So I think it was the fact that Slaying the Dragon was as successful as it was. It made people believe that I would listen and give a fair hearing. And if anything, so in Slaying the Dragon, if there's a villain, the villain is probably a CEO named Lorraine Williams.
Oh, yes, of course it is her. That definitely.
She steals the company from D&D's co-creator and co-founder of the company. And while she does some good things, over the course of 11 years, she does drive the company into the ground. And people have told me that I was very fair, did my best to tell her side of the story too. And I think that it's things like that made people say, okay, I'm going to go talk to Ben. Because I think that book speaks for me and has helped me win allies as people are leaving Wizards.
Now, she owned Buck Rogers, is that correct?
Yep. Yeah, she owned the Buck Rogers copyright along with her brother Flint Dilley. They keep trying to make something out of that, and it doesn't. Buck Rogers just does not translate well to the 21st century. Again, if you're unfamiliar with Buck Rogers, it's like 1930s spaceman gets frozen in time and defrosted 500 years from now, and the solar system has been colonized, and it's just very daring do, gee whiz, golly gee, optimistic, and it just doesn't work, I think, in 2024.
Who's the actor who played in the 70s of Buck Rogers?
That was Neil Garrard.
Yeah, right now he's trying to bust down the door trying to get to you, Ben, so you better watch out.
I mean, well, I hear he wasn't nice to women.
Yeah. Okay, so I remember when I was in the 90s, that's when I was kind of I was already out of playing. I was playing when I was younger for a few years, but I remember in the 90s looking at, always the catalogs too. And I remember seeing Buck Rogers was always at the end, and they was always, and even as a kid, you were kind of like, it just didn't make sense to me and all that stuff, because you got all this fantasy stuff going on. And then Star Frontiers made it a little different and all that. I know, but I don't know, with something with Buck Rogers, it didn't fit to me. So, I mean, even as a kid, I saw that there was a problem there, and eventually it did go sour. But before we go, I pass it on to Steve here. In all your research, what was one of the more shocking things? Because people, like I said, our fan base is a lot more comic people that might not know what the intricacies of TSR at that time and all that. But can you give us some bullet points of some great things and why they should read your book?
So I would say it's a great business history. If you're interested in business, it's a book for you. To give a single example, TSR had an agreement with their distributor, Random House, which said, hey, we, Random House, will pay you not when your books sell, but when we receive them. So for TSR, publisher of D&D at the time, the publication of books and games became the printing of money. Now, that money that they were receiving was technically a loan. It had to be paid back. And when D&D was doing really, really well, they had no problem paying back those loans. And the reason that they had that written in their contract was because D&D was so popular in the early 1980s that they would regularly sell out of core game products like the Player's Handbook. But of course, they also had a publication schedule where they had adventures and supplements coming out. So they would have the question of, do we reprint our core materials that allows the game to grow, or do we keep to our publication schedule? Well, if you you'll get paid simply when Random House receives shipment, you don't need to worry about that, and you can keep pace with the growth of your brand. However, by the early 1990s, Dungeons and Dragons was no longer lightning in a bottle, and was in fact anemic and shrinking. So CEO Lorraine Williams used that provision in the Random House contract to simply keep the lights on. There were products where TSR employees knew that there was no demand for them, and they were shipped to Random House anyway, simply to generate that loan payment that allowed TSR to keep the doors open. And this bubble of debt grew bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until they had $11 million stacked up at Random House. And yet, in their own internal bookkeeping, they would add these loans to their bottom line and count the loans as gross income for just purposes of looking at the health of the company, which it's crazy, right? Like, you're like, wow, a business actually operated that way? They would count a loan as income, and they counted the loan as income. And, there outrageous things like that, I would hope, are the reason to read the book. I can keep going, but you tell me, is that enough? Okay.
Before you go on, I remember I remember some of those Dungeons and Dragons like discs, like they were in those boxes, and they sold them at like GameStop. I remember I don't know if it was GameStop, but they were at those video game stores, and I remember boxes of them in the clearance bins and all that stuff. And because I wasn't into D&D and all that, you're looking at the video games, and then you're like, oh Jesus, all this Dungeons and Dragons stuff are all in clearance, all boxes. But go ahead, you can explain.
So I can tell you that story because there's a story there, which is the company knew that the internet and computers were in some way the future. So in the mid 1990s, they were like, we will produce a CD-ROM version of the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons rules. So they invested in a startup tech company in Madison, Wisconsin, which was just an hour down the road from them, and they produced a CD-ROM version of the D&D rules. Okay, great, good idea. You're trying to reach out to the future. Wonderful. However, because again the D&D was shrinking, the company TSR had to find unusual ways to make money, and one of them was by a financial technique called factoring. So in January of every year, TSR would try to pre-sell everything it could for a year, and it would give merchants a discount by pre-purchasing all their product for the year for TSR in January. The merchants would sign a contract saying, yeah, sure, I'm going to buy 50 copies of this book in June, 60 of this in July, TSR would take those contracts and then sell them to a bank, and the bank would then give TSR money immediately. So instead of waiting all year to see how their sales were, TSR made a little bit less money to get all of it in January. So now the problem here is not so much that they were losing a lot of money. They were losing like 20%, which is not nothing in business, but still, at least you get it in January. The real problem was they were utterly unable to ever respond to any changes in the market or industry over the course of the year, because everything was locked in January. So a salesman at TSR pre-sold I don't know how many tens of thousands of copies of those CD-ROM AD&D rules to Babbage's, the classic 1990s software retailer at American malls. And a few months later, Babbage's went bankrupt. And they were going to go out of business. And the salesman responsible for the sale ran to CEO Lorraine Williams and said, "You cannot deliver those copies of the CD-ROM rules to Babbage's. If you do, they will immediately go into the discount rack there at Babbage's because they're going out of business. Anyone who wants them will go buy them at Babbage's, and it will kill sales in the rest of the sector. No one will ever purchase a CD-ROM from us ever again." This was supposed to be the future for us. And because there was no money available, they could not buy those contracts back from the bank. They shipped them to Babbage's, where User then found them at the discount bin. And no one ever wanted to buy those from TSR ever again. Another example using the same financial technique came about when Magic the Gathering just exploded on the scene. Gosh, I think it was 1993. I wrote a whole book on it, but I think it was 1993.
Yeah, right around there. Yeah.
So it comes out and it just is obviously cracking a pack and starts burning through game stores. And TSR thinks we have to get a competing product out there. But because of factoring and because they had already pre-sold product that must then be delivered, and they could make no alterations, they had precisely $0 to spend on making a competing product for Magic the Gathering. So their Magic competition was pretty awful in every way.
Spellfire, right?
Spellfire. Yeah, Spellfire. It was all recycled art. 100% of it was recycled art. To say that it was rushed to market is a vast understatement. I want to say they wrote the rules in 6 weeks, which is, fast in my opinion. Although, any of you know anything about Magic the Gathering?
Oh, yeah. I had all the cards. I had the Lotus. I had everything. I sold everything, but I had all the.
Are you familiar with how long it took Richard Garfield to come up with that game?
Well, I remember reading inquests at the time that
there's a version of the story that goes a week.
Okay,
by himself.
I knew it was fast, but okay.
Yeah, like Peter Adkison, co-founder of Wizards of the Coast, was like, I'd like a game that's kind of like baseball cards, but you could play it in line at a convention. There's lots of people in lines at conventions. And like a week later, Garfield comes back and he's like, Mana the Gathering. I think you want to say it was called Mana Clash. It was called Mana Clash at first.
And they had the prototypes, right? Didn't Post Malone buy the Black Lotus one for like a million or something?
I want to say he bought that. They had a One Ring card for a Lord of the Rings expansion, and I want to say he purchased that. But I am not a Magic guy, so
I saw that he did. I think he purchased it for $3 million. To the guy who found it.
That's crazy.
So what he's saying though, like it was the One Ring. There was made one card and it was in pack. It was distributed out there, and then one guy got it, and Post Malone bought it from him for like $3 million, something like that.
According to Polygon, Post Malone has bought Magic's $2 million One Ring card. It's a one of a kind Magic the Gathering card that is by necessity the rarest ever.
Yeah.
But again, when you're talking about my book, like I tend to get into the financial weeds to hopefully give you what I think is a true and unredacted history of the game. But again, people who are into business tell me they read it and enjoy it too.
The CEO, every time you speak, she is like twisting and turning, and she hears you in the ether. I'm sure every time you speak. So go ahead, Steve. Give Ben some questions.
Now, just for some context here, I never played any RPG games, especially not because, of course, I was extremely antisocial. And I just couldn't stand being around other people. But what I am interested in is obviously all these twists and turns financially. I mean, that's just, that's the housing crisis all over again. But I'm more interested in, did you find anything about specific people which was disturbing?
Yes. Like, let me think. A lot of it I couldn't use.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but to like the secondary villain, I would say, of the book is a guy named Brian Thompson, who was a New York science fiction fantasy editor who was brought on to TSR to hopefully make TSR into a major publisher of science fiction and fantasy. And he came on with a lot of hard-nosed negotiating tactics, a lot of determination to take advantage of creatives, I would say. And he drove people from the company. Bob Salvatore, R.A. Salvatore, has published 30 novels and sold I don't even know how many millions of books.
The creator of Drips, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Tris Stewart. And Brian Thompson drove R.A. Salvatore from the company with aggressive negotiation tactics. And there's no way that you're not better off with R.A. Salvatore writing for you than not writing for you. There were also, like, I said in the book that some people left TSR because of credible claims of sexual harassment, things like that. So yeah, but it's funny. In the main, most of the people certainly do seem to be Robin Hood's merry band in Sherwood Forest in southern Wisconsin, who just want to be nerdy and make games together.
Look, I want to ask you this. I know there was always rumors of Gary Gygax. Was he a coke? Did he do when he went out to California and he was trying to do his thing? Did he get into the cocaine and all that stuff? The whole party atmosphere? Is that true?
Yeah, oh yeah. The short answer would be yes.
That's great.
Specifics are harder to come by, but like, you know, he clearly was addicted to various substances. I hear cocaine was one of them. People talked about coming over to his mansion in the Hollywood Hills, and you know, there's Playboy models in the jacuzzi and things like that.
Really?
You know, oh yeah. He was recently divorced. He was raised a Jehovah's Witness, and I mean, you know, that's a lot of tension to be released in your mid 40s.
Yeah.
So you know, like, again, it all seems to be true, although other than a weird attempt to work with kind of like a softcore spank film actress, which is very weird to me, and apparently didn't go very far, just far enough for this woman to come to a D&D New Year's party wearing like a frilly dress and not much else. Like, yeah, like again, it was all kind of there, but it seems like the primary witnesses would be his sons and Lorraine Williams's brother, and he talks about it in general, but not in specific.
That is, I love it. How it's supposed to be Dungeons and Dragons. You roll some dice, and maybe you have an imagination with all this porn going on behind the screen. It's fantastic. Go ahead,
softcore spanking. I mean, geez,
yeah,
sounds like a good time. Now, I'm just kind of curious, though. So you're doing this, you know, kind of like letting out the skeletons out of the closet type book of D&D and the business end of it and stuff. But when Steve asked the question, you said, well, there was some stuff, but I didn't put it in. What made you withhold some of this information you uncovered?
Macmillan's lawyers.
Yeah, okay.
The lawyers got a hold of it, and they were like, can't do that, can't do that. That person's alive, can't do that, you know?
Understood.
Is there anything you can spill here? Like with maybe, listen, we don't know the names that well. So, I mean, you don't have to name a name, but maybe a certain situation that was like.
No, because even again, it was credible claims of sexual harassment, and that was pretty much it. And even then, like, I guess the one thing I would say there is, take this where you will, but like in addition to Macmillan's lawyers, largely the women who were the victims of it just didn't want to talk about it, which I can understand as well. So again, it's regrettably it's not as much fun as the porn actresses and the coke in LA, because that we can laugh about, and this it's more like
No,
Do you,
right,
do,
right.
do you think that is the direct result of a group of people who are working together, and they have it's like a boys club, and all of a sudden they're exposed to females and they don't quite know how to handle themselves?
Ironically, I think it is more the result of, if you were CEO Lorraine Williams's favorite, if you're one of the aristocracy within the company, you could kind of get away with stuff. And again, like things I heard were that, she heard about things and just kind of didn't care. So that's probably saying more than I should have. Good job, guys.
but you see, this is what makes your book so fascinating. You don't have to like Dungeons and Dragons. It's a very interesting story, and you go so deep and not pulling any punches that it makes it a remarkable. When I read it, you couldn't put it down, because I would put it down, go, and then I would I got to go back. Oh no, what's happening? So it was very interesting to me, and that's the appeal of this. I do have to ask you this. Do you know the information? Because I was always a big Dragonlance fan, more Lord Soth than Dragonlance. But do you know those ins and outs? What happened to Laura and Tracy Hickman and all that firing and rehiring, and it just I know that they just had to change things up in the story. Lord Soth wasn't supposed to go in Ravenloft. We had James Lauder on this about 5-6 months ago, and he told us his story of that. But tell me some of the problems they were going through.
Yeah, Jim Lauder's a really good source on that, and I would tell you that from where I sit, because without the canon specifics and drama of just Dragonlance, that could be a novel unto itself, or a book unto itself. And I dipped just enough in to kind of get what I needed, and tried not to get sucked into it, because I would have been there forever. But to me, the truly shocking thing was that, well, first of all, I would tell you that when I talked to Margaret Weis about the writing process of Dragonlance, it was she and Tracy Hickman would talk, and then Margaret Weis would go and write. And, authors can put whatever they want in the book and describe their creative partnership however they want to. But God damn it, that sounds like Margaret Weis wrote Dragonlance. So that's one thing. Another thing is that in the mid 1980s, TSR was in a serious slump. The company almost died. Dragonlance was one of the few bright spots, and the Dragonlance novels were wildly profitable. A role-playing game product is incredibly expensive to make. It requires a large staff putting in a ton of time. A novel, by contrast, requires your writer, an editor, maybe a copy editor, and a piece of cover art, and that's about it for TSR. So the novels were wildly profitable, yet they were paying Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman, who at this point were New York Times best-selling authors. They were paying them like they were, God, I looked it up, like shipping clerks or something like that. I looked up incomes in the 1980s and picked something similar to what they were making. An low-level, entry-level position for these New York Times best-selling authors. So shock of shocks, a New York publishing company comes along and offers them decent money to write, and they both quit TSR. And that to me is a shocking moment, that TSR couldn't pay them well enough to keep them. It's one of the reasons they then had to go find R.A. Salvatore, whom they found at a slush pile. He just sent them a novel and they found it. The woman who found it, Mary Kirchhoff, she literally was able to find a brilliant best-selling author out of a stack of nobodies, and she could tell the difference. But to me, it's the the disrespect and unwillingness to compensate people properly that is one of the foundational issues of the company. Now, Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman both get kind of lured back, then they leave again, then they get lured back. like they had to sue Wizards of the Coast recently to get Wizards to publish a novel that Wizards had agreed to publish of theirs. So again, they have a very long and raucous history. But to kind of maybe put a bookend on this, Tracy Hickman wrote about in a blog entry in just the past few years about how he and Margaret Weis were doing a signing, and a veteran came up and presented them with his Purple Heart and said that the Purple Heart in fact belonged to them because their writing inspired him to do the things he did in combat that got him the Purple Heart.
Wow.
And that's, I mean, wow.
See,
wow.
And there's a big connection with, Steve, there's a big connection with the TSR books and comics. These were great things that the mass media did not want to, like, didn't they change up the New York Times bestsellers just so those books wouldn't be up
that's
there?
That's what Jim Lauder says, and I would believe him.
Yeah,
that is believable to me.
It's just funny because the fans, the people speak. You know, like we buy that stuff, we speak with our money, and that's what with the comics. People thought Stan Lee was crazy when he said that he could see the paperbacks and all that stuff like his bestsellers, right? Remember when he said that? He always thought, he envisioned, and people were like, are you nuts? And all that stuff. But it's funny how the parallels between like the role-playing games and the comic books and all even wrestling was always thought of as just such a lower tier thing, but it made the people love that stuff. Kids love that stuff. And yet the mass media and those you know, the big time people, they always just thought it was just this little crap stuff. And they try to block it at any instance because they did not want people to know that this was. I don't understand why. Ben, by going through all this stuff and doing that with TSR, what do you think that is? What do you think from your perspective?
I mean, low culture is always it's always just a matter of time before low culture becomes high culture. Would be my short answer to you. I mean, Shakespeare played for the masses, and now he's taught in universities. Is the classic example. But like, you know, Stan Lee. Gosh, I want to say what. You guys might know this story better than me, but he was thinking about quitting Timely Comics. He thought that his time there was done. He was going to move on and do something else. And he's like, well, I'm just going to do what the hell I want to do. And he did Fantastic Four, you know, and changed his life and all of our lives, right? And Gary Gygax was an unemployed cobbler in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, on welfare. One of his kids is so poor. Well, that one of his kids, the family is so poor that one of his kids runs holes in his shoes every summer, but they didn't get new shoes till spring. So he had to get through a Wisconsin winter with holes in his shoes, and he would shove cardboard in them every year. So, you know, here you have a guy, if not, you know, he's in poverty. It's fair to say that he's in poverty. And yet he's obsessed with games. And a guy comes down from St. Paul, Minnesota, and says, "Hey, I've taken one of your games and done something with it. I call it Blackmore. You're gonna use your rules to go in a dungeon beneath this castle. Your characters persist from session to session." And Gygax is like, "Wow, this is amazing. Let's collaborate on rules," and it becomes Dungeons and Dragons. And I am very suspicious of the rich man with a great idea. Like, you know, the poor guy with a great idea is going to probably work a bit harder on it and think about it a bit harder because it's going to be a bigger difference. And who was the partner there?
Who was the partner with Gygax?
Dave Arneson. Thank you. Arneson. I can't believe I didn't say his name. Dave Arneson.
You did. But what's funny is then they start going, then poor, just like any successful thing, then they break up and they're suing one another too. And poor Arneson didn't get the love and then Gygax loving that fame and all that stuff. Don't want to give back. Loyalty only runs so far in this business. It's so tragic that, you know, even in Steve, you know, we see this now in my business and all that stuff. You know, we do it because we love comics, but we're on the business side of things. And then you see when money gets involved, people lose their mind. They can't think straight. They start making bad decisions because, or they start, they throw that money down and try to make it back. It's like the gambling addiction and all that stuff. Like, you know, it's just, and it was always about the superheroes, you know, it's like, and it's always about the fantasy, like, and the kids got it, but they didn't know what was going on behind the scenes. And that makes it so fascinating to me. Go ahead, Steve.
So, there is something you said earlier on, which sort of piqued my interest because it corresponds quite nicely with something that's going on within the comic book industry right now, where you said that, Hasbro had decided to make the franchise a multi-billion, trillion-dollar company and was going through and cleaning house and making decisions. And, you know, obviously, you know, there's probably lawyers and bean counters and people who are making decisions, whereas creative people who have been there for a long time are just being brushed under the carpet. However, within comics right now, specifically within the creative and editorial, we have an army of people who are coming into our industry that actually don't like superhero comics. And they're coming in and they're saying, I've been waiting 10 years to change this because I always thought it was crap. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to change it because of that way. Not because they love the characters or the stories and have something new to add. They feel that there was something missing. And they feel that the company was doing something wrong. And hence, as I'm speaking, our industry is shaking right now, quaking, because there are no readers anymore. And our industry is being kept alive. And I'm sure, Niall will agree with me on this because he's right there at the cusp of this news. We're being kept alive by variant editions and marketing, very aggressive marketing plans where people are coming along and giving collectors, speculators, and flippers what they want, producing 100 issues of one issue so that people buy it all, but no one's caring about the story. So slowly but surely, if this trend continues, our industry is going to be left like stamps and coins because no one's going to be reading, but they'll have their variants. So I'm sort of interested. Have you been looking into the changes that, that's happening within this Dungeons and Dragons world? And is there any similarities?
So first of all, I would say that I am utterly fascinated by the current state of comics. So I teach 7th and 8th grade, 12 to 14 years old. And if I give a kid that age a comic book, graphic novel, whatever, they are entranced. I literally had a phone call from a parent today who said, so I'm worried about my 13-year-old girl. She won't stop reading graphic novels. And wow. I know it's amazing that when you pair that medium with that age, it is in some way incredibly magical and powerful. And I cannot speak enough to the, again, as a teacher, the magic of that. And yet, how come nobody can figure out how to match that that medium to that age group in a way that's going to create that real next generation? I have the most stolen thing in my classroom is Miss Marvel Volume 1. Oh. I think I have bought that 12 times because it keeps getting stolen again and again. And I see this demand, and it puzzles me why nobody can make that link between that demand and a product that's going to make people money. Because again, my teens want theoretically what Marvel and DC should be selling, but they can't get it to them in some way. But anyway, to actually answer your question, I see a lot of similarities. Differences would be that, again, first of all, Dungeons and Dragons has never been more popular than it is right now. I really noticed it after the pandemic, because again, I'm a teacher, when we came back to physical in-person school and we'd had a lot of turnover, a lot of new teachers, I go into the faculty lounge and every woman under 30 is discussing their Dungeons and Dragons game.
Really?
Yeah, was 100%. 100% of the women under 30 at my school played D&D. And it's just like coincidence. Like my boss didn't hire based on that or anything. It's just that it's become so pervasive in that age group. And again, they all got it. They all got it through actual plays, so, watching people play online. And then it spread through colleges, and they were all recent college hires. And the pandemic, of course, encouraged the playing of Dungeons and Dragons. So Wizards of the Coast, 10 years ago, made the 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons. And the 4th edition would probably be analogous to what you guys are experiencing right now, with someone coming in and changing things kind of just because they wanted to change it. That's a little unfair to the actual designers of 4th edition, but I'm just going to summarize and say it's like that. 5th edition was like D&D Classic. Like, hey, the designers came in and they tried to take the best of every version of D&D ever made and kind of make a classic Eternal edition, and it was hugely successful. Great game. Absolutely wonderful. And now I'm basing things on a little bit of appearances and a little bit on things people have told me. But it seems like what Hasbro wants to do is digitize the game in some way to encourage a subscription model to a virtual tabletop service where you can play online with virtual figurines and a virtual map, which, again, if it's awesome, great. I would love that. If there's this awesome digital tool that's worth $10 a month, we will probably gladly pay for it. But it seems not to be, hey, here's someone with a great idea for a virtual tabletop. It seems to be, we'd like to make more money. You designers, go and generate a product which will make us this much money that people will pay $10 a month for. And that doesn't usually lend itself to great success. So there are definitely similarities there.
Also the little caveat with that is that you sign up for the stuff, you make your character, right? And you keep them through the world. You got to keep paying that fee because you don't own that character, right? Isn't that? And like, if you decide you don't want to pay that fee anymore, and like that, everything that you got online and all the weapons and who knows how bad you build it up, that goes kaput. Am I right about that?
So the virtual tabletop is not out yet. It's been demoed. We've seen bits of it, but we don't really know how much it's going to cost and what the deal is going to be. But I can't imagine they wouldn't do that. Like if there's a lawyer or salesperson involved, it seems like that's the low-hanging fruit, right? Like if you leave us or you leave this product, you can't get your stuff back. I could be wrong, but it just seems like they would do it.
Like any online game.
I've been hearing rumors of that. Go ahead now. So
I was gonna say that's like any online game. I mean, if you played like Star Trek Online or any of those, massive multi-world games, I mean, these people pay real money. I got friends that probably have tens of thousands of dollars invested in these games that once they log off or stop paying, they're done. It's just money down the toilet. But
Ben, I do have to ask, when all those teachers were going, they were talking D&D, did they know that the teacher that they were, the 7th grade teacher named Mr. Riggs was the public enemy #1 to all those games? Did they know that?
I wasn't quite as controversial then.
Yeah. Go ahead now.
So what has speaking of controversy and everything, I mean, this book comes out, successful, you're spilling some beans. What has this done? What is your reputation? What are you dealing with now in the world of the D&D players?
I mean, I got a couple online stalkers. I would say, in addition to that, I have a few, people have started to kind of come to me, for good and for ill. Like I've had a lot of, hey, I think this is a controversy that you should talk about. And I'll read it and be like, I don't know that like a freelancer failing to deliver really counts as a controversy, even though, they sound they sound vile and lazy, but I don't know that that's a story really. But on the positive side, one would be the people that, again, like former Wizards employees just come to me and start telling me stuff. For example, current Hasbro CEO, Chris Cox, has been described to me as brutal and ruthless. People have said that it's almost like he's a robot who feigns being human, but in fact is like, a Terminator beneath it all or something like that. So having people come to me and trust me is really amazing. I do a lot of seminars at conventions, like even I can't believe the crowds I get at comic book conventions for seminars. It seems like if I go to a comic book convention, there's not a lot of D&D stuff there. So I tend to attract large crowds and kind of fill the room, which is really, really nice. But, I think there's definitely going to be a book too. I think I'll probably get a novel sold here and there. So having a literary career is really delightful and amazing. And I'm going to assume that these stalkers, and I'll post things online and I don't look at the comments anymore.
Yeah.
It's more like I drop it and run away, type situation.
I love them. Keep doing them, Ben. I love them because, like I said, it's like I'm just like, like I love it. And like sometimes when something would come out, you would throw something hey, because it was this, and this. It totally throws like a monkey wrench in some new product or something. And I love how you do that. But Ben, I'm gonna be honest here. I don't know if your book, like for a Dungeons and Dragons book, I can honestly think that might be the most important, maybe one of the most important books ever written on Dungeons and Dragons, at least in the last 20 years. I couldn't even be further than that because it was such a refreshing thing to see and read. And it was everything I thought it was. And so I'm just saying that you put, for better or for worse, you put your thumbprint in that industry. And that's a forever book. That's never going away. Even if they wanted to, it's never going to go away.
Thank you. Ironically, I would say that, it's Sean Howe wrote Marvel: The Untold Story, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I read that when I was writing my book, and it was an example in many ways. Because it's a great book. I'm discouraged to hear that Marvel is distance itself from him because, I mean, he's just giving them the outside perspective on their own business, which is really valuable. And Wizards of the Coast, I feel like publicly is like, who's Ben Riggs? We don't want to talk about him. But then when we're at the bar and it's 10 o'clock at night, everybody's like, you're not going to believe this. Let me tell you this thing. Here, tell me this story. What did this person say? It's all as people, they're very interested, but I would say as a organization, they're a little bit afraid to touch me, which is fine. Again, I am the guy that stands outside. That's my thing. And I'm fine with that. If they ever offered to let me, if they ever were like, we'll pay you to write a book, I'd probably say no. And if they ever offered me a job, I'd definitely say, but again, there are other, like John Peterson writes histories for Wizards of the Coast and they're amazing. Michael Whitwer has done work for Wizards of the Coast and it's been really good. So again, that is not to in any way cast aspersions on those guys. It's just, my whole, that's not my thing. My thing is I stand aside.
Yeah. That's like when Vince McMahon has his wrestlers write those autobiographies, but he's looking over every word and he's saying take that paragraph out, we'll put in this, so that's the thing. And, money talks, but good. That's why I think that, in some way you're a caricature /hero player character, make you feel good for the RPG crowd. But you really did something important that I think people that like you gain the respect and you're not going to sell out because you actually want to put the truth out there. And once again, that's the strength of your book and the strength of your writing. It's incredible. It's a great thing. So, anyways, before we wrap up here, Steve, you got any last words for Mr. Riggs?
Yeah, to me, it just seems sort of incomprehensible that you would have stalkers, because if you were to have stalkers, in my mind, it would be a lawyer or someone financially involved with the company. It wouldn't be a fan. It wouldn't be, it wouldn't be someone that's actually playing the game, because, without reading the book, it seems like it's a business 101, of course, of very shady people doing, financial shenanigans, just like normal people like us. It's like when you have people who are doing the taxes and they're like, well, I claim this and I claim that. And they're like, well, how's that possible? Well, I have 19 lawyers that have worked it out for me. So it just seems sort of odd, that when John said the book is controversial, my first thought was that you tore everything about the characters and the history and said, okay, the person who wrote this wasn't actually writing it. It was actually written by some guy in Uzbekistan. So that's what I originally thought. But from what I can see, it's basically a business manifesto. And so I just find it incomprehensible that it would be controversial.
So, we can never see ourselves as others see us. And I think speaking with John has been illuminating for me in this regard, because I think that what my stalkers are never like, man, I want to date you. My stalkers are like, I want you to write this. And typically the thing they want me to write is, I want you to write something that's going to make me look really good or solve a problem for me. Because if Ben Riggs says X, Y, and Z, people will consider it strongly because of his reputation.
Right.
And again, it's not a thing, because again, I don't see my own reputation because I'm inside it. So it's not until I've been listening to John talk here that I'm like, that I think is what is going on with my stalkers. Is that they want me to lend my reputation to their story.
Anything that they say credence to a level that they can't see right now, but with your name tag on it, that suddenly that gives them some gravitas.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Go ahead now.
Yeah, we actually got a super chat here from Aaron Sleeper. I don't know if this is relevant to something you can answer, but he says, how many awesome writers and artists are using Kickstarter to create amazing and unique worlds and story modules playable in D&D rules, or with D&D rules?
The short answer is lots. More specific answers can be had. Polygon typically does like end of year looks at role-playing game Kickstarters, and usually they'll have some specific D&D coverage there. So for if you're not a big role-playing game person, because of Wizards of the Coast basically allows anybody to make stuff for D&D. And Kickstarter has been a huge way for new role-playing game designers to get money and make money designing for D&D. And it's been amazing for the past 10 years. But again, in the last 2 years, there's suddenly been hiccups. It seems like the industry has grown so much that there's now so much competition in the tabletop role-playing game space that even though there are more successful tabletop role-playing game Kickstarters now than there ever were before, but because there are so many, the amount of money designers are making is actually beginning to go down.
Yeah.
So again, it's one of those interesting moments where like the huge success of D&D and role-playing games does have a downside. So I'm sorry I can't give you a specific number. Look at Polygon, but I would say that's kind of what's going on economically in that space.
Yeah, that's it's interesting. That have you ever? I know Lorraine, the CEO there. Have you? I know you couldn't get her interview, right? I know that. But let me ask you this: have you heard? Like, I mean, obviously she read that book. Obviously she knows. No, I 100% bullshit. Or she had one of her kids. You read this and then.
So I'll try to make this story as short as I can.
No, please. Go. You don't have to. Let her have it.
So you're all familiar with TV star Joe Manganiello?
Yeah.
Sofia Vergara's ex-husband. So he's a huge D&D fan, and he was working on a documentary about Dungeons and Dragons. He interviewed me for it, and one day.
Wait a second, Ben. I thought he was working on it with Wizards of the Coast. They actually let you go. Yeah, right. Really?
Well, let me get to the end of the story.
Yes, okay. What the hell?
So he interviews me. A few weeks pass, and then he calls me up, and he's like, "Hey, can we talk?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And he says, "So I'm going to interview Lorraine Williams," which I was never able to do. She turned me down. Her brother sent an email that connected me with her, and she turned me down for an interview, which it's okay, fine. That's the way it is. You don't want to talk about TSR and D&D, fine. But she says yes to Joe Manganiello. And he's like, but I, Ben Riggs, did the primary research work on her. So he basically called me up and was like, what questions should I ask her? And I'm like, I'm just going to send you all my questions. Sure. I'll send you everything, because this is the one shot we're going to get. You don't need to give me credit or anything. Just ask her these things. So he gets her in her mansion outside of Chicago. He says that he films her in front of a weird Freemasonic painting of George Washington. Like, her husband films him filming her. So he's like asking her questions, but her husband is there with a camera in his face while it's a very strange experience. The interview is rather unilluminating, because he said every time he asked her a difficult question, she was basically like, I don't want to remember the bad things. I don't want to remember the bad things. Oh, well, thanks a lot, lady. So I never got her. I don't think that she would have read the book, because I just don't think she cares. I think that it was a thing that she did, and it's over now. And again, she was born fantastically wealthy. I don't know if you guys know any people that are fantastically wealthy. I know a few. And again, their concerns and priorities are so different from mine. Like, one person I know is trying to date, and they're like, well, the first thing is they have to be rich. And I'm like, but you're already fantastically wealthy. Why don't you marry a groundskeeper if you love them? Like, who you... And like, it doesn't matter. And it's that, you can't go into the club and be like, well, I married poor. It's marrying down. Right. And again, to me, I'm like, that's insane. But I think to her, D&D was a low pursuit to begin with. And what does it matter what some dumb kid writes about the time she had running a company? She's rich, and it doesn't matter to her. That's what I think. But
the reason why I'm going to tell you no, Ben, is I deal with a lot of these rich billionaires and millionaires and celebrities left and right. That's my job. And I realize when you look behind the curtain, I think Steve can agree to this too. When you kind of look behind the curtain to some of these people, some of them have the thinnest skin and are the cheapest son of a bitches you'd ever meet, but they got all that money, and they got the thinnest skin that when nobody's looking, they're changing that Wikipedia back to to get that word out of there, put that back in there. I think that I can attest to that, but you'd be surprised on how many rich people are thin-skinned. And you wrote that book, once again, isn't going away. And that's the funny thing. And it's no matter what she does, that book is like, it's like still floating there in the ether. And you should ask me,
John,
or whatever his name is.
If you could imagine, John, imagine if you were in that circle, and there's always going to be people who are sniping and competing. So in her circle, in her financial circle, there could be someone that might be a little bit envious, and they will read the book. Okay. And then they will be at dinner and they'll go, wow, so I heard that you did this. Wow. Isn't that incredible? And then suddenly the other people at the table might be like, but it's too late, So I tend to think that would probably happen. This thing has not happened in a vacuum, and I know a lot of people will be like, "Oh, stupid D&D," but there's people out there that will find anything they can to get a little scalpel and do a little cut. Okay, and so if she's invincible and she's being like, I did this and I did that, and you wouldn't believe what I had to do this, then someone goes, here she is again bragging. Well, you do realize that I read that book by Ben Riggs, right? And it says on page 19 that you stabbed that person in the eyes with a knife. You know, this is like, oh. So that's how I envision her knowledge. Maybe not read it, but others that she knows in her circle probably have. Because
and Ben, there's like a little voodoo doll underneath her bed that has your picture right on that face, and it's got like 50 pins in there, and she's like, "You son of a bitch."
If she read it and she didn't like it, I think she would have sued me by now.
Well, I don't know.
Which would have been great for the book, actually. But
I know. But Ben, one more thing. You wrote it so incredibly well. Like, it's so, why you wrote it, the way it's so simple to follow, but it's so in detail. You know, I mean, it's so much like Sean's. Like it doesn't have to be extravagant words and all that. Like, I mean, it's so, anybody can read that, and it's so deep. It's so remarkable. And that's what I loved. It's like, and it looked like you were just talking to people, like, you're just talking to regular folk. And it's so good to the detail. So that's, like I said, I wrote it and you'd fall asleep. You'd wake up in the middle of the night. I got to get a few more pages in. That's how I got it. And I was like, that son of a bitch. Like, it was so good. So I'm just saying, it was friggin'. Don't sell yourself up short, Ben. Me and Steve and Niall, we roll in those circles with those big time people, especially me and Steve. But I'm just saying, it's crazy what you figure. When you find out who these people are, you're like, really? They care about that? Oh, they do. And they know. I swear to God, she knows. I'll bet on that. What do you think, Niall? You think she knows?
Oh, she knows.
Yeah. See, we know, Ben. We know.
We
know. So don't sell yourself up short. But
well, if any of your rich friends need a writer, let me know.
Yeah. But anyways, Ben, thank you so much for being here and having and discussing it. We're not your typical people that interview, we love when people get into the weeds, and we celebrate people like you because they go out there and they say the truth like that, and it's awesome. So even to people that don't know you, we now throw it up there one more time. Just for anybody to, if anybody wants to get a great read, you do not have to like Dungeons and Dragons to understand. This is like business drama 101. It is such an enjoyable thing. So you just see greed, corrupt, and just stupidity that happens at the highest levels. It's fantastic. It's fascinating. So I recommend anybody pick it up. Now, Ben, any last words?
Buy my book, available everywhere. Slaying the Dragon: A Secret History of Dungeons and Dragons. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Niall. Steve, get us out of here with Mighty Mystic Millionaire.
Oh.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on Pop XP. If you haven't already, make sure to click that subscribe button and also click the bell for notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content. Also, don't forget to head on over to Twitter and follow us at the Pop XP. And over on Instagram at the Pop XP. Thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you.